Hey, all, welcome to another Mercy Conversation. We are still celebrating Easter around here. As you can see, our cross is overflowing with the flowers of a new creation, even from the wound in the side of Christ. We've had such a joyful time celebrating Easter and pondering its meaning in our community, and we hope to share a little bit of that with you this week as we talk about having breakfast with Jesus.
Come, Holy Spirit, renew the face of the earth. Set your people free. Come, Holy Spirit, renew your image in us. Heal our humanity.
All right, y'all. Well, again, happy Easter. We're going to talk about having breakfast with Jesus. Easter is so many things. The resurrection is so many things. One of the things that we say in our community about the resurrection is that the resurrection changes everything. And it does. It does. The world is fundamentally different. We are fundamentally different because of the events of Holy Week, the events of Good Friday and Easter, and the love of God that is revealed and is triumphant in those moments. And yet, when we look at the gospel stories, we realize it's interesting how Jesus chooses to reveal himself after everything has changed, right? Jesus is alone in the garden with Mary Magdalene. She even confuses him for the gardener until he speaks her name. Jesus shows up where his friends are literally hiding, and he greets them. Yeah, he says, "Peace be with you," and we have a lot of theological import that we associate with that, and we should. The truth is, he's greeting them. We come again, as we did last week, and there's Thomas, faithful Thomas, who says, "Jesus, I want to see. I want to touch. I want to know." Jesus says, "Yes, here, touch these wounds." Something revealed about who Jesus is, and that's just John's gospel. If we look at Luke, we see Jesus walking, right? Walking with two sojourners as they ponder the events of that terrible Friday. We see Jesus sitting down to dinner with them, and as he breaks bread, they see him. And this Sunday, we get another story of resurrection. And what's Jesus doing? He's out on the beach. I like this Jesus, right? He's out on the beach and he's preparing breakfast for his disciples. Now, take just a moment. I think this is a story that we often imbue with a lot of shame. Like, what are the disciples doing? Why are they fishing? Didn't Jesus just commission them? And didn't Jesus just give them the Holy Spirit and say, "Hey, I'm sending you as God has sent me into this world," and here they are fishing? Well, I don't think this is a passage about shame. Nowhere in this passage do you see Jesus upbraiding them. In fact, we see something really important about our God, and we see something really important about Jesus. We see Jesus meeting his disciples right where they are, right? It was true with Mary Magdalene in the garden. It's true with the disciples who were hiding out. It's true with Thomas who says, "Hey, I need to see this thing. I need to touch something." And it's true here when the disciples have gone back to Galilee and they're back in the fishing boats, back almost where Jesus found them, right? Jesus meets us where we are. And that's the thing about this resurrection that changes everything. Because if we're honest, we look around and it seems like nothing has changed, right? It looks like everything is still going on the same. And yet we have this proclamation, which I am convinced is true, this gospel truth that we preach and proclaim, that the resurrection changes it all. And yet so much seems the same. Jesus meets us there, right? What do we do with the fundamental reality of a new creation? What do we do while we're still living in the old creation? How do we embody it? How do we build community? How do we form it? How do we make it? And suddenly, if you're like me, you feel overwhelmed. How do we make this happen? Well, we don't have to make it happen. That's what Jesus did. Jesus said to Peter, hey, Peter, and he said to the rest of the disciples, I'm going somewhere you can't follow. And Peter's like, oh, I'm following, right? Jesus says, no, you can't. The new creation is something that Jesus has done. It's something that's real. We don't always feel it. We don't always see it. We even might even think it's a fantasy. We might think it's not even real, but it is real. The difference is we're invited to participate. How do we participate? Well, Jesus shows us, right? Jesus didn't streak across the sky like some Marvel superhero. He didn't show up with some great deed of power. He'd, done miraculous things in the past, but Jesus just shows up where people are. He has conversations. He knows people's names. He responds to the very real questions and the needs that people have. He provides breakfast. He walks with us. He shows up. Y'all, that's how we live the new creation. We don't have to make it. We don't have to force it. We don't have to organize for it and, let's get our plans in place and our programs of new creation. Somehow in the mystery that is the cross and the resurrection, God's already done that. Our role is to live into it, to see differently. And all of these stories of resurrection, the resurrection changes how we see things. And we see it in this story, right? The disciples are in the boat and they haven't caught anything. They're struggling, and Jesus shows up and says, hey, put your net out on the other side. But they don't know it's him. And then when there is suddenly the nets begin to fill with fish, right? The beloved disciple says, hey, Peter, it's the Lord. And Peter, as is so indicative of the way he's portrayed in the Gospels, is like, I'm off. I'm going to go, gets dressed, he runs to Jesus, first there on the shore. And Jesus says, hey, y'all, let's eat. And Jesus is again breaking bread. Y'all, we need to have more breakfasts with Jesus. We need to have more breakfasts with one another. There is something holy. There is something new creation. There is something radically revolutionary and world-changing about getting around a table or just out on the beach by a fire and sharing a meal with one another. It is the substance of the new creation, being present to one another, knowing one another's names, listening to one another's needs, and being present to one another. And then Jesus takes it a step further. And again, this encounter between Jesus and Peter, I imagine after, breakfast is over, everybody's full, and somehow Peter and Jesus find themselves alone. Again, this is a story that a lot of preachers will read and they'll imply shame. Oh, Peter, you denied Jesus. And even the 3 times, you denied him 3 times. So Jesus asked 3 times, do you love me? Y'all, it's not about shame. Again, it's about Jesus meeting Peter in his brokenness, probably in his shame, right? Jesus isn't creating the shame, but I'm sure Peter carried it. I get that. I understand that. You probably do too. And Jesus meets him there and he just says, Peter, man, do you love me? Peter's like, oh yeah, I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Again, he says, Peter, hey, do you love me? Jesus, I love you. Tend my sheep. Again, he says, hey, Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I love you. You see Peter's exasperation, but again, he's locked in the prison of his own thinking, of his own shame, because Jesus just says, then feed my sheep. What's going on in this exchange? Well, first of all, again, Jesus is meeting Peter right where he is. He's meeting him in his brokenness. He's meeting him in his darkness. He's meeting him in his shame. He's meeting him in the place where he doesn't know what to do with his perception of his own failures. And Jesus just says, hey, you love me. Jesus knows the answer. Peter's like, yeah. And Jesus, here's the key, y'all. Jesus isn't asking Peter, hey, do you love me? Because I don't know, man. It's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, Peter, you love me, right? Great. Love my people. You love me? Love my people. It's right back to the new commandment, right? When Peter maybe didn't even hear the new commandment, right? Because Jesus said, hey, that's what I've told others. I'm telling you now. I'm going away, but I'm going to give you a new commandment. Love one another as I've loved you, right? Peter says, you going somewhere? It's almost like Peter didn't hear, and we're like that sometimes. If Peter didn't hear the new commandment. Jesus says, Peter, you can't come. Oh, I'll come. I'll lay down my life for you. You lay down my life for me. Will you? You won't. But don't worry about it, right? The very next thing Jesus says is, don't let your heart be troubled. If you believe in God, you trust God, trust me, right? What we see that playing out in this interaction with Peter, I think, right? Jesus is reminding Peter, hey, Peter, you love me, right? You profess a willingness to lay down your life for me. And you failed, you denied me. Yeah. Then take up this new commandment. This is the shape of the new creation. We love God, then we ought to love human beings. We love Jesus, then we ought to love those that Jesus loved, which, is everybody, right? And then Jesus ends up by saying, follow me. Follow me. It'll lead you to some places that you're not expecting and you're not prepared for. There was a time when you said, hey, I've got this, I'm going to do this. And there'll be a time when you don't have power anymore, but still, I invite you, follow me. The new creation begins the same way as the old creation. It begins with an invitation. Resurrection still calls us to discipleship. It changes everything and it changes nothing. The way we embody, live into, enjoy, participate in, collaborate in, co-work with God in the new creation is just by following him. And what's he do? Again, he shows up to people. He's present. He meets people where they are. He doesn't shame. And he invites us to breakfast.